Hi, this is George Alger, and welcome to today's segment of Our Ventura TV. Today's guest is Debbie Cregan, who is with the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, also known as CCHR. Welcome, Debbie.
Thanks very much, George. It's nice to be here.
So what is CCHR?
CCHR is a watchdog organization that looks into any type of human rights abuses in the field of mental health. And that's their purpose.
Okay, now what does that mean?
Well, basically, let me back up just a little bit and tell you how the organization was formed, and that will answer that question. Based on the writings and studies of L. Ron Hubbard, who founded the Church of Scientology, he was very interested in the field of human rights and worked very hard on that. In about 1969, the church partnered with Dr. Thomas Szasz, who's a psychiatrist at the time, to form the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, because at that time in the mental health field, patients were being institutionalized and basically stripped of all civil, constitutional human rights. They had no rights. And this group was formed. It's a non-profit, non-religious, non-political organization, and its purpose is to find cases of abuse and bring those that are doing the abuse under the law and to justice. Okay,
good. So how does it do that?
Well, basically, there are chapters all over the world of CCHR, and they're put together with volunteers, and they have hotlines, websites, ways to be contacted, and they get the word out that if you do have a family member or a friend or even yourself who you suspect is a victim of psychiatric abuse, you can contact them. And then they will work with people to investigate and find out what's really going on. And they have been instrumental in bringing many criminals to justice who were taking advantage of mental patients.
Yeah, I also understand that there's even been some psychiatric hospitals that have been closed because the abuse was apparently so rampant that they didn't consider this was a venue that could be brought to a brought to a higher standard, I guess.
It's true. There are instances really all over the world where these institutions had been operating for years with just horrific practices going on, and the patients were so victimized and vulnerable and taken advantage of that they had no way, and their voices weren't heard. CCHR came along and heard them and stood by them and advocated for them and got those places shut down. And the stories coming out of what went on there are probably worse than most horror films. I mean, it's really things that you can't believe happened, but they did. So they've really cleaned the field up quite a bit, the field of mental health.
Good. Now, do you have any insight into whether the families of people in these institutions are aware of what's actually going on inside?
Well, in those cases, they were not. And part of the unraveling of them is sometimes something as small as a written communication from one of the patients to a family member that had a tiny little note on it that said, "Help me, I'm being abused here." And that family member contacted CCHR, and that led to them really finding out more and more and more, because CCHR will go and knock on the door and say, "What's going on in here?" Whereas family members would be kept in the dark, and it was really pretty hard to penetrate.
Okay, now I know we have some DVDs here. Let's take one of the two. Tell me what this is.
This was a documentary produced by CCHR. This has to do with exposing the dangers of psychiatric medication with regard to children. The over-medication of children in our country has just gone through the roof. And there are dangers associated with psychiatric drugs that don't get made as known as they need to be. These drugs carry warnings on the sides, and some of the side effects in fact are suicide, violent tendencies, etc. This documentary interviews the families of children who were on these drugs and didn't make it. And it's pretty shocking, but it's important for people to know. One of the things CCHR really is going for is making sure that people have what's called informed consent when they get involved with mental health treatment, that they know what they're being prescribed and what it might do to them, that they know what the treatments, you know, what the side effects are, what the risks are. And so many times, especially with mental patients, these things, this basic human right is not afforded them. They are not given these choices, and they're really taken advantage of that way. And that's what that documentary seeks to help handle.
All right, so this one is called Dead Wrong and How Psychiatric Drugs Can Kill Your Child. Does this also cover the amount of psychiatric drugs that are used in schools, or that are implemented through schools?
Yeah, basically it talks a little bit about how these children get on the drugs in the first place. And more legislation is being put in place to prevent schools and teachers from just saying, oh, your child can't come here unless they're put on psych meds. And so that's another thing that was becoming rampant. And so parents are being given more information, and that's what CCHR works on, is to back legislation where they can to help keep children safe from just being forced onto these drugs.
Yeah, so I understand that there are more kids on psychiatric drugs than ever before.
It's true.
Do you have any insight into how that came to be?
Well, I suspect it's a lot fueled by the fact that the drug companies that make these drugs are multi-billion-dollar industries, and they have, their goal is to sell the drugs. They have a lot of money to put behind whatever, studies they can find to prove the drugs are safe. They are the main source of education for the doctors that prescribe the drugs. So it's fundamentally a very corrupt situation right now. And that's probably the reason. And I think getting the word out there are alternative therapies to psychiatric drugs, and they're listed on the CCHR website. You can go there and find out lots of other options and ways to treat mental health issues without resorting to these harmful drugs.
Okay, and I've heard that there are some programs in place where a school actually derives revenue for every child that they put on drugs. You know if there's any truth to that?
I haven't heard about that specifically, but it doesn't sound far off. And I do know that for a while just the wholesale drugging of foster children was finally exposed and reported, and it was just some outrageous percentage of foster children had been put on psychiatric drugs, and there's now legislation to protect them in the state of Texas, I know. So that's something that we work on all the time.
Good. All right, let's take a look at the second one here. And this documentary is The Hidden Enemy Inside Psychiatry's Covert Agenda. So what is this one about?
Well, this documentary was put together kind of spurred by somewhat recent reports of the high suicide rate among our military personnel. And this is something that, the mainstream media has been reporting on. There's been a lot of exposure on this. And what CCHR found when they investigated was that literally 2 million of our armed services personnel are on psychiatric medication. Currently, 23 soldiers a day take their own lives. It's an unacceptable statistic, and it's directly linked to the effects of these drugs. So this documentary interviews soldiers who were on the medication and got off. It interviews the families of soldiers who died as a result of taking their own lives. Interviews doctors who disagree with the practice, and exposes the fact that since World War I, the military, the psychiatric arm of the military has been using our military personnel to experiment with on the effects of these drugs. And it's fundamentally wrong to take advantage of these men and women who are there to protect us and betray them with, putting them at risk this way. So the hidden enemy is that the psychiatric push through the military to put them on these drugs is a total betrayal.
And these documentaries are available through the website?
They're available through the CCHR.org website, and I'm not sure if you can watch them on the website. You may be able to, but you can certainly go on there and order them. They're available.
Good. So if someone were to go to the website, is there, many websites have so much information, you
Sure.
could miss some important things. Is there anything else that you might suggest they take a peek at?
Well, they certainly should explore it. It's a pretty well put together site and easy to navigate, and it's very informative, and I would suggest that everybody take a look at it, because right now with the common use of these drugs, everybody knows somebody who's at risk to the bad effects of them. But certainly if you do know somebody that you suspect is a victim of mental health care abuse, you can go to the site and report it, and CCHR has volunteers who will help you determine what you can do, will help get lawyers to prosecute these offenders and get their licenses taken away, get them put in jail, whatever it takes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So just about out of time here. Is there summating message you'd like to convey to the viewers? You might also want to just mention the website again. Sure.
Well, like I said, CCHR.org is the place to start when you need help. The local chapter also has a website. I believe it's CCHR and that has a local phone number that they can contact. And basically, the message I have is inform yourself, make sure you understand what this stuff is and what it does, and be aware.
Debbie Cregan, thank you very much.
You're so welcome.
This is George Alger signing off for this segment of Our Ventura TV. Until we meet again.